In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Well, if you're like me, you were probably on edge early Saturday evening when you heard the news that the United States had bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran. And yet, by Tuesday, after a rocky start, Israel and Iran agreed to a ceasefire. With Iran's nuclear capacity severely damaged, the world breathed a sigh of relief that the 12-day war had finally ended. Now, who knows what the future holds for the Middle East? Iran remains a belligerent nation, but one thing is clear. The cessation of hostilities would not have been possible without the United States. As NATO recognized this past week, America remains the last best hope for peace and freedom on this planet. Now, this Friday, we Americans celebrate our 249th anniversary of independence. Who would have imagined that back in 1776, that 13 fractious colonies would come together and become the world's preeminent superpower? There are many reasons for America's strength and influence in the world, but the most important is our country's commitment to freedom. The very first rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights are freedom of religion, speech, and association. The name given to our nation in the closing phrase of the Star-Spangled Banner is the land of the free. We in America enjoy enormous freedom compared to every other nation on this earth. Economic freedom, political freedom, religious freedom, personal freedom, and communal freedom. We enjoy the freedom to choose, freedom to learn, freedom to speak, freedom to worship, freedom to be different, freedom to protest and even say outrageous things without government recrimination. Now, where did we get this love of freedom? Well, America is grounded in biblical faith, tempered by the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. And at the heart of biblical faith is a commitment to freedom. In the Old Testament, from the time God sent Moses to deliver the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, to the time God brought the Hebrews back from the Babylonian captivity, God is revealed as a let my people go kind of God. And the same is true in the New Testament. Jesus announced freedom as his purpose in ministry when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, to let the oppressed go free." Jesus proclaimed freedom as the focus of his ministry when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And Paul declared that the consequence of Jesus' death and resurrection is that for freedom, Christ has set us free. Now, freedom, of course, demands responsibility. As the founders of our country knew so well, only a moral people can be a free people. For freedom to thrive, we must fulfill our duties as responsible citizens. We must vote, pay taxes, comply with the laws, respect property, demonstrate loyalty, uphold the peace. And despite the list of the works of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit that Paul enumerates today in our lesson from Galatians, he takes care to preface those traits with a single reminder: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Freedom and responsibility, love of neighbor and love of country, are at the core of this nation's character. But they raise some probing questions that I want to consider this morning with you. Question number one: do we believe in freedom enough to allow others to have it? Now, this is where the United States is different from Iran and China and Russia, North Korea, and even many Western democracies. It is one thing to grant freedom to those who think and believe like us, but what about those who do not? Are we prepared to grant them the same freedom we want for ourselves? Well, this is what makes a free people free. Freedom demands that we accept people's right to believe and behave as they choose, and whether we agree with their choices or endorse their personal preferences is not the issue. The issue is whether we're prepared to give people permission to think and believe differently from ourselves, provided they don't hurt others or threaten others. Now, Americans have every right to pursue the change they want, and we do, in elections, in the courts, in the state legislatures, and in Congress. We can advocate, protest, work to change laws, vote politicians in or out, so long as we respect the rule of law and do it peacefully. In Robert Bolt's play, A Man for All Seasons, there's a conversation between Sir Thomas More and his son-in-law, William Roper. And they're talking about Richard Rich. Now, Richard Rich is a despicable, self-serving human being, and he's working for Chancellor Thomas Cromwell, whose only moral principle is power. And Moore says that Rich has done nothing illegal. But Roper objects, saying it's only a technicality since Rich is morally bad. And the conversation continues. Roper: so now you give the devil the benefit of law. Moore: yes, what would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get after the devil? Roper: yes, I'd cut down every law in England to do that. Moore: oh? And when the last law was down and the devil turned around on you, where would you hide, Roper, the laws all being flat? This country is planted thick with laws from coast to coast, man's laws, not God's. And if you cut them down, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would then blow? Yes, I give the devil the benefit of law for my own safety's sake. Now, Thomas More understood that freedom for others is freedom for us. Get rid of the laws, ignore the laws, violate the laws for what we think is some justifiable purpose, and we lose all safety for ourselves. Thomas More was right. I give the devil the benefit of law for my own safety's sake. Do we believe in freedom enough to allow others to have it? Then we must oppose denying others the rights that we want for ourselves. We must not do that, even if we want a more perfect society. For in denying their rights, we risk our own. Conformity is the enemy of freedom. Question number 2. Do we believe in freedom enough to affirm a faith that allows it? Now, when you take the element of freedom out of the expression of faith, then you move away from biblical faith, for biblical faith involves free choice. A faith that is forced upon another person is never genuine faith. Now, Christian theologians make the distinction between two types of freedom. And most basic is the freedom to choose and make decisions. Human beings, unlike other creatures, have the power of choice. We have the ability to choose one thing over another. The pursuit of happiness in our Declaration of Independence presupposes that human beings have the freedom to choose a way of life that works for them, provided their beliefs and values and lifestyles are not in conflict with the common good. And that's why people may live and they may believe differently, but still be good citizens. Now, in addition to freedom to choose, there is moral freedom. Moral freedom. And this is the freedom that chooses according to God's will. The freedom to choose what is right and good and true. The freedom that is life-giving. The freedom that leads to genuine health and happiness. The Christian church is the agent of this freedom. And the role of the church in a free society is to persuade and to teach people that moral freedom leads to a happy life and a vibrant nation. However, the church cannot compel people to choose moral freedom. We can't force people to do what we think is right and good and true. The choice must be left to the individual. Now, the church can and should make its case. We should explain and defend the Christian faith. We should raise our voice for what we believe is the right way. But in the end, we must respect the conscience of people to choose for themselves, even if it is different from us. Now, before COVID, I enjoyed browsing books at Barnes & Noble. Now, I don't do that very much anymore because I tend to get most of my books from Amazon or other booksellers on the web. But still, I can appreciate the value of browsing in person. There's something to that that's very enriching, and I'll often find myself being attracted to a book that I had no notion about before I entered the store. Now, there are thousands of books at Barnes & Noble, and they include books on philosophy, religion, politics, history, sociology, science. And inevitably, I will come across books that I think are flat out wrong, misguided, tasteless, and even offensive. But would I want to ban those books simply because I disagree with them? The answer is no. I wouldn't even want to ban books that attack Christianity. In fact, I wouldn't want to ban books that attack Episcopalians. Now, how can I be so tolerant of ideas with which I disagree? Well, I ask myself, how does God treat us? And the realization that God does not force himself on us, does not compel us to believe, but gives us the freedom to choose, encourages me to respect the choices of others, so long as those choices do not hurt other human beings. You see, real freedom is never forced. Real freedom is a deep respect for the individual to live out their own life in their own way, for only such freedom makes biblical faith possible. Do we believe in freedom enough to affirm a faith that allows it? Then we must oppose coercion, the demand that everyone express their faith in our terms, for coercion is the enemy of freedom. Question number 3. Do we believe in freedom enough to make sacrifices for it? Now, on July 3rd, 1776, the day before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, George Washington wrote a letter to his wife anticipating the hardships that would occur. And here in part are his words. In a few days, you will see a declaration setting forth the causes for which have impelled us to this mighty revolution and the reasons which will justify it in the sight of God. I am fully aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yes, through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. Well, the next day, 56 representatives of the 13 colonies signed the Declaration of Independence, and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the United States of America. They would not betray that pledge, even when several of them died or went bankrupt because of the war. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors. They were tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or the hardships of war. And all of them believed that freedom was a treasure beyond price, and it was even worth their lives. That spirit of sacrifice, the willingness to pay the price, to keep the flame of freedom bright, has continued in this country to this present day. It's what keeps America free. People who sacrifice and even lay down their lives for a cause that is greater than them. Now, many of us know that the late Senator John McCain spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He told of his fellow prisoner, Lieutenant Commander Mike Christian. Mike had collected scraps of white and red cloth, and he had sewed these scraps together into an American flag. He then sewed this makeshift flag inside his blue pajama top. And the men would hang Mike's pajama on a wall each night. And then they would say the Pledge of Allegiance. That ritual brought them together. It reminded them of their purpose. Well, one day, the guards happened to catch the men saying the pledge, and they dragged Mike away, and they beat him brutally. But that very night, when Mike returned to his cell, he began gathering pieces of cloth again, and he was already starting on another flag. Now, we may never be called to make that kind of sacrifice, the sacrifice that Lieutenant Christian made in that Vietnamese prison. But we can make sacrifices here at home. We can build up the nation, promote the common good, ensure that every American lives in dignity, and especially the weak, the poor, the marginalized. we can and we should become a more perfect union through the efforts of Americans working together. After all, we are Christians who claim to practice love of neighbor. And when we practice love of neighbor, anything is possible. Do we believe in freedom enough to make sacrifices for it? We must resist complacency, the tendency to take our freedom for granted. For freedom and complacency is the enemy of freedom. Well, here then are three questions that all of us should ponder as we approach Independence Day. Do we believe in freedom enough to allow others to have it? Do we believe in freedom enough to affirm a faith that allows it? Do we believe in freedom enough to make sacrifices for it? As we struggle with these questions, we understand what George Washington meant in his first inaugural address when he said, "It is a strenuous thing, this living the life of a free people." In this dangerous world, a free and moral people is the surest way for our nation to continue as a beacon of hope on this planet. We Christians must oppose coercion in matters of faith. We must oppose conformity in religious, political, and social beliefs. We must oppose complacency in our lives, recognizing that freedom must constantly be won, or it will eventually be lost. We must support freedom for all people. For as St. Paul writes, "For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery." Amen.